Good afternoon, viewers from across the continent. I'm pleased today to welcome you to this new episode of Africa's Governance Voices. I'm delighted today to welcome a special guest, Mr. Thulani Tshefuta, formerly chair of the National Governing Council of the APRM in South Africa and currently president of the civil society organization Forum. Today we are going to talk about an important topic that's caught the attention of many a viewer across the continent, and that is the issue of xenophobia in South Africa. Mr. Tshefuta, welcome to the
Thank you.
podcast. Perhaps let me ask you first, what historically would you say were the steps since the first country review of South Africa from 2006-2007, the steps that were taken by the government to address the issue of xenophobia? We know that South Africa is often referred to as a rainbow nation that's welcomed so many migrants from different parts of the continent, but it's an issue that has been raised over and over again. And so what would you say were the steps that were taken by the government to address this issue?
Firstly, it is important to acknowledge that it will always be of grave concern when citizens, as individuals or organized groupings and or organizations, take up actions outside the confines of the law. It becomes even grave in concern if that happens in a democratic society that is also a constitutional democracy. That is the premise. Secondly, the first generation review of the APRM in South Africa lifted the issue of xenophobia as one of the things that not only government but the whole of society needed to respond to. And it is important to highlight that when we took over the leadership of the APRM in 2020, preparing for the second generation review, we were mindful of the outcomes of the first generation review report. And we went back and lifted all those things that the first generation review report had identified and brought them into the table, because it could have been easy for us to just shelve them under the carpet and say these are no longer topical issues anymore. But we brought it into the agenda of the second generation review because we wanted to assess the extent to which we have gone in addressing those issues. Hence, it even became a resolution of our NGC and the report, second generation review report, that we recommended that South Africa must host a migration conference under the auspices of the APRM, not just as government. So that which was already hosted by government, led by the Department of Home Affairs, was a government process. We wanted a society-wide process under the auspices of the APRM, which will not only look into administrative instruments of how we deal with issues of migration, but have a broader conversation that is alive to the political challenges of our region and the continent, including economic challenges, and even do that as an exchange together with other countries and begin to understand what are the challenges that South Africa is confronted with and how does it respond? Are those similar to experiences of other countries, and how do other countries relate to those challenges and respond to those? So that we are able to separate issues that may be of hate in nature to issues that are criminal in nature. And we wanted that to be an open conversation amongst all stakeholders that would be confronted on that. And most importantly, I do want you to study the patterns, that with all instances where there is improvement in economic performance, opening up of economic opportunities and employment opportunities, it is always at cross purpose with incidents of attacks of foreign nationals. And when the economic indicators are looking down and those frustrations rise, then you are going to have those triggers. What is important is we must understand all the time what are these triggers that activate these attacks in different communities.
That's a very detailed response, and I think that we need to have a comprehensive understanding of migration, which is a known phenomenon and a phenomenon that happens not just on the continent but beyond. I'm interested in your views about the current situation. We know that there's been marches across the country in Durban, Johannesburg here, in Cape Town. We know also that there are municipal elections coming up this year. And so I'd like to know what you would say are the drivers currently of those marches, of that type of frustration, that sort of anti-foreigner or anti-legal foreigner sentiment that we're seeing in the country. Would you say these are economic reasons that are behind such action that is being taken against foreign businesses, for example, in the country? Or would you say there is a bit of, we've heard from certain corners of the continent, would you say there's some type of political instrumentalization of that kind of frustration because economic conditions are not looking good for some South Africans?
It is most certainly a case of frustrations that are translated into political instruments, right? More so with the point you're making that we're going for local government elections. So people tend to use anything and everything when we go towards elections as an instrument to get attention and say, if this does not get done, we are not going to vote, we are not going to party, and all of those. And so it becomes political instruments in that sense. But what we must get straight is that South African people are not xenophobic people. South African society is not a xenophobic society. You must appreciate the fact that for all the foreign nationals that are in South Africa, they are not in some camps. They are within and amongst the South African people. They relate to people, they adopt the types of lifestyles that people live and integrate into those communities. And these interactions are at various levels. We cannot rule out the fact that the South African middle class may actually be serviced by foreign nationals in their households in one way or another, whether in the garden or in the household and so on. Legally, there are people who are in the education system who are imparting knowledge and skills and transferring to South African youth. And that becomes another point of convergence between South Africans and foreign nationals. There are instances where in businesses that we run as South Africans, we need this or that other skill from foreign nationals that get to be thrown in. They provide that technical support, service, or anything, and then move on. In our universities, we have people from all over the world. The first biggest question we must raise as a concern is that, could it be that it is only and only Africans that bring the challenges that come with migration in South Africa. And I want to answer that upfront and say, no, it is not, and it cannot be. But Africans become the easy target. The next point is that we must ask ourselves a question that beyond economic issues, there are social relations that are being built. Social relations that even get into levels of being romantic in other instances. So at which point would you say that hate has started to manifest and express itself? It has actually come out that even some of the people who are leading the charge on the foreign nationals now have romantic relations with foreign nationals. And then comes the distinction we must make between legal and illegal foreign nationals. And where it becomes a problem is when you are challenging issues of illegality and begin to bind everyone under the same belt and paint everyone under the same brush, then you are planting seeds of hate. Now, let me tell you how far this hate will go. It will start by saying, we don't want foreign nationals in South Africa. Good and well, let them go, and they will go. The next pinch of frustration arises. It will be that we don't want people from Eastern Cape in Gauteng. They must go home. Good and well, they go home. They leave Gauteng as a province. Another pressure point arises. No, we don't want people who speak a different language here. They must go home. So there will always be a point of difference. It will even get to a point where you say, we don't want women in this community. They must go wherever they want to go. Then it may be that men alone are remaining. Say, no, we don't want men with beard here. And then it's men without beard. We don't want men like this or the other way. So there will always be a point of difference in society. And it is that difference that we must not use against each other, but use it for complementarities in society. And so, if we are not alive to the fact that not everyone who is non-South African is illegal in South Africa, that is the point we must appreciate. It is equally the point we must appreciate that of those who are illegal, we must make the point very clear that there is no society that takes itself serious that will ever tolerate illegality. People must do everything possible in their means to normalize and legalize their stay in any society, so that the very same instruments that governments must use to plan and budget for the benefit of everyone in the South African territory, then it must not be that we are planning for 10 people when there are actually 100 people, and you cannot account for 90 people because there is no way in which you can track and trace and say, this is how we can account for these people. Beyond that, even in cases where there may be illegality, the most hardest of criminals in any society, including in the South African society, have rights. When you treat people, you don't treat people like you treat dogs. Even dogs as animals have rights, like you treat a stone. There has to be a level of human-to-human interaction. That is why in the APRM second generation review report, including in the civil society engagement group of G20 that South Africa hosted last year, we believed that in order to deepen this, we need to play more in the space of peoples to peoples diplomacy, such that we build bonds than break bridges. In building those bonds, we get to understand each other better. In understanding each other better, we are able to know what is it that divides us. What are the circumstances under which the next person left their country to come to South Africa? What are the pressure points they feel by being in South Africa? What can the whole of society do to help them normalize and legalize their stay in South Africa? And what we must also make categorically clear is that there may be allegations of foreign nationals who are selling drugs, illegal businesses, and all of that. When you get to that point, you must appreciate that South African prisons are full of South Africans more than foreign nationals. Right? So, when you treat with crime, you don't look on the color of the person. You don't look on the language the person speaks. You deal with crime because in law we are all equal. And it is just common courtesy that for any visitor, they conduct themselves differently and better in a foreign space than when you are in your own space. If I could be in my house, I could be having my legs on top of the table now. But because I'm in a space where I'm invited as a guest, I respect that. And there are things I would not do, which I would have done under normal circumstances in my own space. And finally, the point we must make is criminality must not replace legal forms of dealing with any challenge that we're confronted with. It must equally be an interesting question to make an inquiry about as to, do the people in the Eastern Cape not feel the pressure of foreign nationals such that people from elsewhere must go and organize in the Eastern Cape? Do people in Gauteng not feel the same pressure such that they must relax and people from elsewhere must come and organize and be the loudest voice on this? And so we must allow communities to define themselves on how they relate to people and how they deal with the challenges that they are confronted with. And when we do that, even the recommendations of the second generation review of the APRM report in South Africa will not be successfully implemented if left to the hands of government alone. Because when criminality takes place, whether by foreign national or locals in a community, not every community has the luxury of a police station. It is people in a community that are there. So those are the people that we need to empower with the necessary social tools to be able to relate with the next person as a neighbor, regardless of who the neighbor is, be it a foreign national or a South African national.
If hate is left unchecked, there is no telling where it can actually go or how far it can actually spread. It's something that needs to be said. And also, you heard it, viewers, South Africa is not a xenophobic society. I'm a foreigner living in South Africa. I've been here for many years. I work here at the APRM Continental Secretariat with both South Africans and foreigners. I obviously have a legal status which affords me the ability to work and travel outside the country and also within the country. Mr. Tshefuta, thank you for that response. If I were to pick one of the many brilliant themes that you raised in your response, education comes to mind. And I would like to understand what your views are on education of the population, but mostly the young population of South Africa, those that are considered the born-free generation. I often hear, for example, whenever xenophobic attacks arise in the country, that South Africa is not grateful to the many countries that harbored, that hosted ANC figures during the liberation years. And I want to find out if you think that there's a lack of education or of understanding among the young population about South African liberation efforts. What is it that you think, not just the government, you alluded earlier in your response that to the fact that it's not just government that that needs to be mobilized, but civil society. And so what do you think can be done to empower South Africans with the knowledge of greater partnership and cooperation with the continent? South Africans surely cannot hate themselves because they're on the continent. And so what is it that education can play, and what role can education play in cementing the bonds between South Africans and the rest of the continent?
There is absolutely no alternative to democracy and civic education that is anchored on public education and awareness. There's no alternative for that. For anyone who does not understand and appreciate where they come from is likely to misunderstand the grounding where they stand currently, and is even likely to commit the same mistakes that were committed previously into the future. So, again, there is absolutely no alternative to democracy and civic education, which is anchored on public education and awareness. It is an important premise to start reminding the South African society not of what other countries did to support the South African efforts for national liberation, because it may be easy to forget that which the other person has done, because you are just a recipient of so much benefits from different countries. But what is important to remind ourselves about is, what did it feel like to live under apartheid colonialism? That by virtue of my skin color, there are areas I cannot stay in. There are schools I cannot go to. There are subjects I cannot do. There are jobs I cannot do. Do you see that?
Yes.
So the ceiling is lowered so much that, not because I've committed any sin as a black man, just by virtue of being black, all odds are against me. The brutality of the system and the violence that came with it. Murders, rampant murders. And so, it brings us to the point of appreciation that our freedom was not free. It was paid for by the highest price, and the highest price is life and blood. So when we were confronted with that struggle, we were not on our own. There are others who made it easy by offloading some of the load on our shoulders through the support that you are mentioning. Now, as a human being, you don't behave like a snake that you can come across injured on the road, you treat it, and think you can convert it into a human. The minute it gets into full health and strength, it is going to bite you. So that's not what you do as a human being, right? And so, what is important for the South African society is to bring that education and say, the others may not be in the situation we were in at that time of apartheid, but there are different ways in which we can also extend a hand of friendship and solidarity. That's why solidarity was one of the key pillars of our theme on G20 as South Africa last year.
Yes.
It is premised on the appreciation that no individual can make it on his or her own.
Absolutely.
No community or society can make it on its own. And it even sounds better in economic terms that South Africa cannot be the champion of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement and promote exchange of goods. Well, it may be for a selfish reason that South Africa is now squeezed by the USA, and then we see Africa as a market. So you can't see the movement of your goods into the African continent as an economic benefit for you and to your society, but hate the very same people that you see as a market. What we must accept is that we can't open borders for goods and services in the African Continental Free Trade Agreement and close the same for the people and say, we want your products, but we don't want you. So it's an important discussion that must begin to unpack what are the social implications of the opening of borders for economic trade, and what are the social outcomes that are going to emerge out of that. Because if there are products that must be moved from South Africa to Zimbabwe, right? Those products won't deliver themselves there. There must be a truck that is driven by a human being in the shortest time possible, who must get through the border, deliver the product into the market so that there is consumption, there is economic spin-off and all of that. The minute you frustrate that person from going through, you are frustrating the very same economic endeavor that the whole of Africa is agreeing on. And so, when we look into this issue, we must deepen the understanding of the circumstances that are prevailing in various African countries. I like the fact that you are putting a disclaimer that as a national of not South African origin, you have been here, you have never experienced all of that. And so, the same with those who may be illegal. They must appreciate that there is an obligation on their part to fulfill the legal requirements of the South African society. There's no way in which any society that takes itself serious is going to forgo its legalities and bend backward for anyone, not for locals, not for foreign nationals. So if all of us must abide by that law, in abiding by that law, there are responsibilities which we think in that migration conference that we proposed in our second generation review, different role players must begin to take responsibility for. On one side, you can't stand as a government of any country, persecute your people, push them out of the borders, wherever they land, when they have challenges. You don't take responsibility, you blame the hosting government. So those are conversations that governments must have through the instrument of the APRM and not just use it as a diplomatic platform of engagement. Our leaders must begin to tell each other that this which you are doing in your country is squeezing your people out of your country and territory into our borders, and it becomes a problem for us. What are you doing to make sure that you undo that tide? So when you push people, they won't be landing into trees. They're going to cross a border and get into another territory. And I believe in my heart of hearts that there is no one who can voluntarily leave the comfort of their homes and just go elsewhere and be uncomfortable. So the more we use the instruments of the APRM and respond to governance issues, respond to issues of economic governance, respond to issues of sustainable development, is the more people will go back to their countries, stabilize, take ownership, and make meaningful contributions in the development of their countries. This I'm saying not only in the context of foreign nationals coming into South Africa, even domestically it applies to the urban and rural divide in South Africa. That the more economic opportunities are concentrated in urban areas, you are squeezing people out of rural areas into economic centers, into urban centers. And when you reverse that through the APRM instruments or thematic instruments, then you are attracting meaningfully those people to go back into their spaces of comfort.
Great. You spoke of the African Continental Free Trade Area. It was launched a few years ago, and as we speak, trading is happening under that regime for many countries on the continent. But we know that the AFCFTA is just one goal that will bring about the full continental integration that we seek and that our forefathers dreamed of. Yesterday, Togo authorized Africans to enter its country without any visa for 30 days. On the free movement of people, which you spoke of, what is it that the African Union can do? Some people say that it's unrealistic to want all 55 AU member states to open their borders so that people can actually freely move, do business. Is it a realistic goal? Because on the continent, you have different countries at different levels of economic development. You have big economies, industrialized economies like South Africa. You have much smaller economies. What is it that the AU can do from a civil society perspective to not necessarily hasten continental integration, but to make good on the promise of the AU founding fathers, to make sure that it happens someday, and that passports, which, for example, were given to some heads of states about 10 years ago, are given to all African citizens, the 1.4 billion Africans that live on the continent, so that you can, without having to think about needing a visa to travel to, say, Algeria or Equatorial Guinea, can just buy a ticket and freely go there.
From a civil society point of view, it may be easy to make a call that if this system is said not to be workable for integration, why does it work for political elites of a certain category of passports? In political office, in businesses, and all of that. And the biggest frustration goes to the lower levels of populations. The first thing that I would say the AU needs to do is to basically learn how did Europe do it? Because it is being done elsewhere. So we can't say that it cannot be done. It has not been done. It is being done elsewhere. Why is it that for us to believe that we are truly in control, we have to frustrate our own? There are people who are sitting elsewhere outside Africa who have the benefit of being countries that are not required visa to travel to some African countries. Why can the same not be done? Of course, with the necessary checks and balances. one of which is the 30 days you were talking about. It can be said that you enter and do it in 30 days. In 30 days, you're out. And so, it is a dream that can be realized. The only problem we have is that our solutions are oriented towards policing solutions. That how are we going to police so many people, the movement of so many people, if that is to happen? And I can tell you now, policing is not going to be a solution to that. You can't provide policing solutions to socio-economic challenges. So we must go back and redefine our bottom lines of what are the challenges that we are dealing with and addressing, and address those, and all else in the system will just fall into place.
Absolutely. And the fact that we have continental ambitions and continental objectives does not or should not make us lose sight of the fact that we have internal challenges which we need to deal with. One parting question, Mr. Tshefuta. You were the former chair of the National Governing Council in South Africa, and South Africa did its second generation country review under your leadership. It was received too much acclaim, and currently there are plans for countries to embark on the third generation review project. South Africa, I hope, will follow in the footsteps of countries like Mozambique, which is gearing up for a third generation review. So looking ahead, what types of issues would you like to be featured in the third generation review report of South Africa? What is it that you think was not sufficiently looked into or sufficiently analyzed by the APRM in 2021 when South Africa was undergoing its second generation country review?
In the last month or so, we had an elaborate policy school of civil society organizations in South Africa. And coming out of that, we basically believed that the socio-economic upheavals that we are seeing are the manifestation of an underlying challenge, which is the biggest challenge for South Africa. And we have went on to define that challenge as the challenge of economic growth. So that is the bottom line that we have identified. And so we would be the first ones to call for progressive reporting on the implementation of the second generation review report recommendations, so that we take stock of how far we have traversed on that and take those as a transition into the third generation review. And that third generation review must be anchored through all angles on economic growth and development. And we are coining it as economic growth and development because growth on its own does not lead to development.
True.
Growth on its own does not translate into economic benefit for all. And so we truly believe that if our third generation review can be anchored on economic growth and all that it has to do by placing people at the center of all development. And so we may even coin it as economic growth that is creating public value. Economic growth that is creating public value places people at the center of all development. It views people as agents of stimulating and promoting the same growth. It views people as agents of driving and delivering that growth. It views people as agents of benefit out of the very same growth, such that it does not become growth by some for a few or others. That is one aspect of what I am convinced from the benefit of having been the chairperson of the National Governing Council of the APRM in South Africa, into the role that I play as the president of Civil Society South Africa, including being the leader of the civil society constituency at NEDLAC, which is the apex platform of social dialogue in South Africa between government, civil society, labor, and business. That is the biggest challenge that we have to deal with. And I have to hasten to add the element of youth employment as one of the key pillars that we must be intentional about when we undertake that third generation review. Equally, the issue of deepening democratic governance is going to be a critical pillar of consideration. Let me explain why. Particularly because the South African governance architecture has entered uncharted waters of coalitions and governments of unity at levels that are unprecedented. When it started, we could understand this or that municipality. When it got into provinces and national government now, so it means it's going to be with us for some time. So we must shift our mindset into appreciating how do we deal with issues of service delivery, development, whilst we manage the structures and processes of governance. So governance architecture is going to be one of the critical issues that we have to look into. I'm glad that even the three priorities of the Government of National Unity now have the pillar that is focused on building a capable, ethical, and developmental state. And that has nothing to do with bureaucracy and bureaucracy alone. At the center of it, it also has an element of active citizenry. Building a capable political leadership, efficient and competent administration, whose interface with the people creates this notion that I like so much of public value.
Thank you so much for these informed views. As country coordinator of South Africa, I've taken note of these very precise recommendations. And thank you, viewers, for joining us today for this special edition of Africa's Governance Voices with my guest, Mr. Thulani Tshefuta. We hope that this was informative and that this allowed you to have an informed opinion of the current situation here. And we hope to talk to you and present another episode in the near future. Thank you.